Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today is day 42, and we're continuing today to look at the instrumental, how the instrumental case is used. We've now learned all the cases, right, at least in the singular. Remember, we'll pick up the plural endings in the following book, in book 2. So let's start out quickly by looking over 4 different verbs that mean to study. And these are confusing, again, because in English, we would say in each of these cases simply to study. We would use the same verb to study, but in Russian, we have 4 different verbs. And so it's a fairly common mistake to confuse these verbs. So let's look them over now. Учиться, научиться means to learn, or again, we could think of it as meaning to be taught, right, passive, or to teach oneself. In either case, that would mean to learn, right? Учиться, научиться. And what we're learning, if it's a noun, it could appear in the dative чему, right? Чему, or we could use an infinitive, like to learn how to do something, right? That would be an infinitive. And as we know, учиться all by itself, the imperfective can also mean to simply go to college, to be a student. Где ты учишься, meaning what school do you go to, right? Where do you study? Or another example, она научилась плавать. She learned to swim, right? And they're perfective, right? She learned it completely. She learned how to swim in infinitive. Заниматься, as we know, takes the instrumental, right? I think we'll practice that more today, actually. In any case, заниматься means literally to be occupied or to occupy oneself, right? Including the reflexive particle. And if we think of it that way, it may help us understand why we're getting the instrumental in Russian, right? You busy yourself with something, right? You're occupied with something. Instrumental, чем, right? Мне надо заниматься, that can mean I need to study just in a kind of general sense, right? I need to do my homework. I need to busy myself with my studies. Мы занимались весь вечер, right? We spent all evening studying. Okay, now note that that's just studying in general, doing homework. We're not talking about studying for an exam or studying a specific subject, right? It's just kind of an all-purpose doing homework verb. Now, if you want to mention studying a particular subject, like what we're studying in school, what our major is, right, also, we would use изучать, right? Изучать needs a direct object, что there, right? That shows us the direct object is in the accusative. For example, что ты изучаешь? What do you study? Я изучаю химию. I'm studying chemistry, and the subject is in the accusative there. Finally, готовиться literally means to prepare oneself or to be prepared, right? In any case, we're studying к чему, right? For something. To or towards something would be the literal, I guess, understanding of that in the Russian. К чему ты готовишься? For what are you preparing yourself? What are you studying for? К экзамену по физике. I'm studying toward an exam in physics, right? По, we've seen that before, right? It takes the dative, and that's often used for academic subjects, right? A test in physics, a lecture in physics, or whatever. Okay, so let's translate a few of these. And again, note that in Russian, they're certainly not interchangeable, right? They mean different things. They're used with different cases and so forth. So we have to be very careful in choosing accordingly. By the way, a poster, учись и работай, работай и учись, right? Study and work, work and study, right? Ongoing education there. Anyway, where did she go to college? Где она училась? Right? Учиться, where did she go to, where was she a student? Где она училась? Okay, number 2, I can't go to the movies, I've got to study. Я не могу идти в кино, мне надо заниматься. Right, there's our general purpose, studying, doing homework, verb. 3, we were studying all day yesterday. Мы занимались весь день вчера. Right, we were studying. That verb is imperfective, by the way. Весь день, all day. 4, she studies physics and Russian. Okay, here we've got subjects, right? Direct objects. We need изучать here. Она изучает физику и русский язык. 5, you're in college, what do you study? Okay, so in college, again, we don't need to translate that word for word, right? The idiom in Russian would be Ты учишься, right? You're a student, you study. Что ты изучаешь? What do you study? Again, I'm using ты there. That would be an informal exchange, right? Что ты изучаешь? 6, I studied well for the math exam, meaning I prepared myself well for the math exam, right? This is the fourth verb we looked at. Я хорошо подготовилась, right? Feminine subject. Я хорошо подготовилась к экзамену по математике, right? К экзамену, right? I studied for the exam, and then it's an exam in math, по математике. Okay, let's look at ways to talk about our interest, sports, instruments, all sorts of things here. So we see that заниматься, as we know, it can mean simply to study. It can also take чем, meaning to busy yourself with something, right? What are you up to? What do you do? With what do you occupy yourself? For example, чем ты занимаешься? What do you do? With what do you occupy yourself? And this could be asking about almost anything, right? Sports, music, hobbies, what you study, almost any sort of activity. So we would follow that up with instrumental, right? Я занимаюсь спортом, балетом, фехтованием, right? Any activity in the instrumental case. Now, what about sports and games? There we could use, we could say заниматься plus the instrumental, or we could use this kind of more specific verb, играть во что, right? To play a game. And you see that играть, right, is followed by v plus the accusative in Russian. For example, чем ты занимаешься? You could say я играю в футбол, в покер, в шахматы, which is a plural-only noun in Russian. That means chess. Right, so v plus the accusative with sports and games, especially things like team sports, right? You see some sports that are more like individual activities, like maybe fencing, фехтование. They tend to be used with заниматься, right? You don't really play fencing, right? We don't even say that in English, right? You do fencing, I guess. Okay, and finally, what about musical instruments? We get играть, the same verb, plus на чем, right? На plus the prepositional. Чем ты занимаешься, right? What do you do? Well, let's say I play an instrument. Я играю на скрипке, на флейте, на пианино, right? So I play literally on these instruments. Locative case. Pianina, by the way, is a borrowed noun ending in an o, so it doesn't decline. Okay, so let's take a number of activities here, sports, academic subjects, and so forth, and say, how would we say that we do them, as we say in English? Well, again, in Russian, we're going to have to choose, be a bit more specific sometimes. Right, basketball, there's a team sport, so we'll say simply, I play basketball. Я играю в basketball. Number 2, гребля. Well, you don't really play rowing, right? It's not, I guess it's a kind of a team sport, but we don't really play it. So let's say we occupy ourselves with it. Я занимаюсь греблей. Греблей. Instrumental. Number 3, I do business. I occupy myself with business. Okay, well, it's not an instrument. It's not a game. Я занимаюсь бизнесом. 4, балет, right? Not a game, not an instrument. Let's use заниматься. Я занимаюсь балетом. I do ballet. 5, математика. Okay, here we have a couple of options. We could say that I заниматься, right? To say that generally I'm interested in math. I busy myself with math. I do math. Я занимаюсь математикой. Or, of course, since this is a subject, we could also say я изучаю математику if you're formally studying it. Right? 6, instrument, guitarra. I play the guitar. Literally, I play on the guitar. Я играю на гитаре. 7, a team sport, хоккей. Я играю в хоккей. Right? Hockey, of course, very popular in Russia. 8, пение. Okay, that's an activity. It's not a sport, obviously. So let's use заниматься. Я занимаюсь пением. Пением, instrumental. Number 9, an instrument, труба. Я играю на трубе. I play on the trumpet. I play the trumpet. 10, легкая атлетика. Again, not really, we don't really play track and field, right? In English, we do it, I guess. Let's use заниматься. Я занимаюсь легкой атлетикой. right? Literally light athletics. Of course, here atletica in the Russian is plural. Okay, what about professions? How do you tell your profession? Well, let's start out with asking questions. Кто ваш брат по профессии? Right? Who is your brother in terms of profession would be a literal way to translate that. We could say он врач. Okay, that's very simple. That's just using the nominative, right? Кто ваш брат, он врач. A bit more fancily, sort of, or more tricky construction would be to use the instrumental with работать. Кем работает ваш брат? As whom does your brother work? Right? In what role? As whom does he work? Instrumental. Он работает врачом. And in the book it should be just a period there. It's no longer a question. Он работает врачом. He works as a doctor. Okay, so let's try a few of these. Again, there are two ways we could do this. One very easy, one a bit trickier because we need to use the instrumental. Let's say our dad is a journalist. Наш отец журналист, or наш отец работает журналистом. Instrumental. Number two, our mom is a professor. Наша мама профессор, or наша мама работает профессором. We're going to talk a lot more about professions in, I believe, book 4. But for quite a few of them, there's the profession itself is always masculine, and we'll discuss more why that's the case later. It may not be quite what you think. It's kind of an interesting topic. Okay, number 3. Мой знакомый, my acquaintance is a businessman. Мой знакомый businessman, or with the instrumental, мой знакомый работает бизнесменом. Number 4, and by the way, the simple using the nominative I think would be more common, right? That's probably what you'd normally say, but we're practicing both in any case. My female acquaintance is a psychologist. Моя знакомая психолог. Или она работает психологом. 5. Your friend is a writer. Твой друг писатель. Or he works as a writer. Твой друг работает писателем. It almost sounds a little bit odd, right? I think, again, we'd normally probably just say Твой друг писатель. He is a writer. Number 6. Твоя подруга врач. Your female friend is a doctor. Или она работает врачом. Твоя подруга работает врачом. She works as a doctor. Okay, a poster here. Точно по графику, strictly according to schedule. We could say of this guy that он работает машинистом. He works as an engineer, right? A locomotive engineer, one who drives the locomotive, machinist. Okay, a few new prepositions of location with the instrumental. So these are kind of easy to memorize, right? They're above, below, in front of, behind, right? So sort of two sets of opposites, all of which take the instrumental when we're talking about где, right? When we're telling where something is located. Again, not where it's going, not where it's coming from. Well, there's a bit more to say about that, but we'll talk about that in a moment, right? So location, at any rate, is going to be one of these prepositions followed by the instrumental. Another one is рядом с, literally in a row with, or we could say next to, alongside. And we know already that s itself takes the instrumental, so no surprise there, right? Alongside or in a row with, again, is the literal translation of that. So, for example, над городом летит самолет, above the city, right? Она сидит под деревом и читает, under a tree, под деревом. Перед нашим домом есть небольшой парк, right? In front of our building, перед нашим домом. За этой стеной, right? Behind this wall, instrumental. And finally, рядом с магазином, right? Alongside, next to the store, right? In a row with the store, literally. Okay, two of these have additional meanings that are quite common. Перед, in a temporal sense, means just before. Now remember, we learned earlier that до also means before, but до plus the genitive can mean at any point prior to something. Перед means something more like just before, right? Directly before. Надо много заниматься перед экзаменом, right? We need to study a lot just before the exam. period plus the instrumental. Or za, which literally means behind, and we can think of that if you're chasing something, you're pursuing something, you're behind it, you're trying to catch it, you're after it, so to speak. We can use this in a very common expression, meaning to go pick up something at the store, right? Going to fetch something. Мой друг пошел в магазин за пивом, right? He set off for the store, literally after beer, right? He's going to get some beer. He's making a beer run. Here's an example in a poster. Пьяный за рулем преступник, a drunk man behind the wheel, right? That's his position. He's behind the руль, right? За рулем преступник, he's a criminal. Okay, let's fill in some instrumental endings. Fairly simple, right? The cat is sitting beneath the sofa. Кошка сидит под диваном. She usually sits on the sofa. Okay, some review here. We need the locative, sorry, the prepositional with that. Она обычно сидит на диване. Number 2, next to the trade center, or the shopping center, the mall, is located a huge movie theater. Рядом с торговым центром находится огромный кинотеатр. 3, he was sitting and reading a textbook in front of, literally, but temporally here, before the lecture. And what kind of lecture? It was in Russian history, right? So we'd say in English, before the Russian history lecture, he was sitting and reading his textbook. Он сидел и читал учебник перед лекцией по русской истории, right? Dated there after the по. Number 4, behind this building is located a big and beautiful garden with a fountain. За этим зданием находится большой и красивый сад с фонтаном. Number 5, above my writing table, that is desk, above my desk, there's an old Soviet poster. Над моим письменным столом есть старый советский плакат. Number 6, she was sitting on a bench, okay, that's going to be prepositional, in front of the library, and she was waiting for her friend, right? Она sидела на скамейке, right, prepositional, перед библиотекой, instrumental, и ждала подругу. She was sitting and waiting, awaiting her friend, accusative. 7, at the lecture in physics, at the physics lecture, I usually sit next to a friend, right, alongside a friend. На лекции, prepositional, по физике, dative, я обычно сижу рядом с другом. Number 8, next to the station, the subway station Dostoevskaya, there's a big trade center. Рядом со станцией метро Достоевская есть большой торговый центр. Okay, let's practice this fetching construction. That's a really useful one, right? Again, imagine that we're after something. We're hunting for it. We're going to fetch it. Пойдем за хлебом, молоком, колбасой, right? Let's go fetch bread, milk, sausage, шоколадом, пивом, водкой, right? Let's go pick up some chocolate, beer, vodka. Okay, here's a poster from World War II, right? Водрузим над Берлином знамя победы. Let's hoist or raise the знамя победы, the banner of victory, над Берлином, above Berlin. Okay, so the topic here quickly is, what about these new positions we have, right? Above, below, in front of, behind, right? We just saw how to use those 4 new prepositions to talk about где, right? Which is location, right? We're in a location, above, below, in front, behind, right? Well, we learned that those are taking the instrumental. Well, what about куда and откуда, right? As we well know by now, with these positions in Russian, you can either be in them, that's где, you can be moving into them, that would be куда, or out of them, right? That would be откуда, as we put it, right? So we can quickly review the 2 basic positions we've already learned, right? In or on, right? В is, right? Она живет в Москве, он ждет на вокзале. right? Now compare those of v noun versus a na-noun, right? Она возвращается в Москву, right, to Moscow. Он спешит на вокзал, he's hurrying to the station, accusative, right? And then откуда, right, from these positions, we get is or с, depending on whether or not it's a v or a na noun. Она едет из Москвы, she's on her way by vehicle from Moscow. Он вернулся с вокзала, he returned from the station. Okay, so let's look now at these four new positions. Под, за, над, перед. Now we know already that if we're talking about где, we're going to get instrumental, right? Кошка сидит под диваном. The cat is sitting beneath the sofa. Собака сидит за деревом. The dog is sitting behind the tree. Самолет летел над морем. The plane was underway flying above the sea. And перед, он ждет перед вокзалом. He's waiting in front of the train station. Now, if we now go to our куда column, right, we're talking about going into these locations, into these positions, right? Под and за, as we might expect, they are followed by the accusative, right? Using, when we're trying to convey куда. For example, кошка побежала под диван, right? The cat ran underneath the sofa, right? To a position underneath the sofa. That's a куда expression that takes accusative here, as we would probably expect. Or собака побежала за дерево. The dog ran behind the tree, right? We're moving to that position behind the tree. That's куда. We get accusative. Now here's sort of the exception. That's why we have the black box. In modern Russian, над and перед always take the instrumental. That is, it doesn't matter if we're in that position, in a position above, or moving into this position above something. It's always над plus the instrumental, no accusative. And the poster we just looked at, right, it could be understood in that fashion. Literally, we're trying to get to Berlin and raise that victory banner into a position. So really, strictly speaking, that's куда, and we might expect to get над plus the accusative, which you could have in certain Slavic languages, but not in Russian, right? So it's a bit of a deviation from what we might expect. Над and перед always take instrumental. So, for example, повесим плакат над диваном. Let's hang the poster above the sofa. Well, we're hanging it into this position above the sofa, so to speak, but we still get instrumental. Or паркуем машину перед театром. Let's park the car into a position in front of the theater, right? Or to this position. That's куда, but again, we still get instrumental. Okay, finally, what about откуда? Well, only two of these have a sort of откуда equivalent. And под and за. And here in this case, we get something a bit new for us, I think, a compound preposition, right? Is под and is за, meaning literally out from beneath and out from behind, right? And these both take the genitive, right? These compound prepositions like this, of which there aren't very many in Russian, they're kind of governed by that first component, is, which takes the genitive. So, for example, кошка смотрит из-под дивана. The cat is looking out from under or from her position under the sofa. Собака смотрит из-за дерева. Right, the dog is looking from its position behind the tree. Now, they're somewhat oddly, maybe for us, looking. Right, the verb of looking can also be combined with куда versus откуда. Where to are you looking? What are you looking at versus where are you looking from? But of course, we could also use these is под, is за with motion verbs and things like that. Okay, so let's translate a few phrases here and be careful to distinguish as necessary between где, куда, and откуда. He placed the empty bottle beneath the table. Okay, that's going to be a куда, right? Он поставил пустую бутылку под стол. Right, so под again takes the accusative when we're using куда, под стол. Yeah, okay, number two, the empty bottle stood beneath the table. Пустую бутылку стоял... Sorry, I totally goofed there. Пустая бутылка, the subject, стояла под столом. Right, so that's где, where was it? It was beneath the table. In Russian here, we could say literally стояла, it stood, под столом. Okay, number 3. After dinner, he took the bottle from beneath the table. После ужина он взял бутылку, accusative, из-под стола. There's our compound preposition, right, out from under the table, literally. Sometimes Russians, guys especially, will do this quite often. If you're not really in some kind of formal dining situation, they'll often place empty bottles on the floor. I've seen that done all the time, right? So watch for it. Again, it's maybe not the best of manners, but it seems to happen quite often. Number 4, the waiter walked behind the bar. Okay, this sounds like, let's assume, to a position behind the bar, right? Официант пошел за барную стойку, right? He set off to this position behind the bar, right? That would be куда. Okay, let's say he worked for a while behind the bar, right? That's где, right? He's in this position. Он поработал за барной стойкой, right? Behind the bar. And let's say there was a mirror above the bar. Okay, that's going to be nod plus the instrumental. Было зеркало, right? There was a mirror, над барной стойкой, above the bar. He came out from behind the bar. Okay, that's going to be one of those compound prepositions. Он вышел из-за барной стойки и принес наш чек, right? Or наш счет. 8, there's a huge tree in front of our dacha. Okay, перед нашей дачей есть огромное дерево. Огромное дерево. Okay, so here's a somewhat specialized topic. 3 nouns used frequently with za. So these are definitely worth noting, especially the first one. Basically, let's take a noun like граница, which literally means border. And this is the way Russians idiomatically speak of being abroad or going abroad or returning from abroad, right? So we have a certain space, and as usual, we have a где, куда, and откуда variation, for talking about being in the space, going to the space, coming from the space. And quite logically, Russians think of being beyond the border as being abroad, right? So we say if you're located beyond the border, that is abroad, you use za plus the instrumental, right, for a где expression. Например, он долго жил за границей. Он долго жил за границей means literally he lived for a long time beyond the border or behind the border, right? That is abroad. Okay, if he's going to that location, then, as we would expect, we get za plus accusative. Он поехал за границу, meaning he's left on a trip to go beyond the border, accusative. And from beyond, we get the compound preposition is za, and we say things like он вернулся за границей, right? He returned from beyond the border. Okay, 2 other examples, somewhat less common, maybe. Город, Russians speak of za, well, literally, again, beyond the city or beyond the city limits, meaning, near town, outside of town, in the suburbs or something. For example, его дача за городом, right? His dacha is outside of town, right? Он часто ездит за город. He often travels outside of town, куда. And if you return from that location outside of town, он вернулся из-за города. He returned from outside the city limits, so to speak. Now, you may notice here that in these expressions, at least the first 2 there with город, you usually hear the stress put on the preposition. And that's something, if you haven't, I'm not sure we've talked about this in the book, certainly not as some kind of regular feature. In a lot of Slavic languages, this happens with regularity, such that there's a sort of a rule, or there are rules we can give for when the stress jumps from the noun that's an object of the preposition onto the preposition itself. In Russian, there really is there's no rule for that whatsoever. It's not a regular feature of the pronunciation, but you will see it in certain stock phrases, right? So it's really just sort of set phrases where you get this pattern. Sometimes there are variations, as we'll see in one moment. But anyway, it's something to listen for. And again, it's not like if you say za город, it's not like people won't understand you or will care, right? And you may even hear Russians say that, I don't know. But usually you hear the stresses on the za. Okay, speaking of which, stole, in an earlier version of the book, I had the za, look in your book and see if the za is underlined, right, on the kuda expression. Well, let's start over. So stol is a table, obviously. And in Russian, the idiom for sitting at the table is sitting behind the table, right, which makes sense, I guess, right? So if you're behind the table, sitting there, that's где мы сидели за столом. We were sitting behind the table. If you sit into that position, again, we're moving into the position behind the table. За plus accusative. Гость сел за стол. Okay, so again, check your book. If it says za stol, it's not so much that that's wrong, but it's kind of weird, admittedly. And I think I put this here because I've heard that in certain, like posloviцы and things like this, certain kind of folky expressions. But I think most Russians would definitely say za stol. So you might want to correct that. I would definitely put the stress on the stol here. But then otherwise it's correct, right? The откуда, right? If you're so to speak standing up from behind the table, все стали из-за стола, out from behind the table, you could say. Okay, so again, some useful expressions there, especially the granitsa thing. That's one you hear quite often. Okay, so let's do a few exercises here, just translating. We returned to America from abroad. Мы вернулись в Америку из-за границы, right, from beyond the border. 2, we spent a month abroad. Okay, that's going to be где мы провели месяц за границей. Or to put that a bit more simply, in terms of the grammar we know, мы были за границей месяц, right, for a month. Now, by the way, the term I used earlier, мы провели месяц, that would be maybe the best way to put that, but we won't learn that verb until, I believe, book 2 and definitely book 3. Okay, 4, we have dinner at the table. Okay, so literally behind the table, that's going to be где, right? Where do you have dinner? Мы ужинаем за столом каждый вечер. 5, we sat down at the table. Okay, we're moving into this position. That's куда, за plus accusative. Мы сели за стол. За стол. 6, we got up from the table, out from behind the table, literally. Мы встали из-за стола и вышли из кухни, right? We left the kitchen. Again, that verb выйти is not something we've had. I should probably change that example. But again, the main thing here is мы встали из-за стола. 7, our dacha is located outside town, or just outside town. Наша дача находится за городом, or again, за городом. I think you usually hear that. За городом with the stress shifting to the preposition. 8, we go outside of town every Saturday. Again, куда мы ездим за город каждую субботу. 9, we return from outside town every Saturday. Мы возвращаемся из-за города каждое воскресенье. Okay, so that stuff is a little bit tricky there at the end, and we won't really be using it a whole lot, I have to say. I think it may not even be in the many of the exercises to follow, but it's something good to file away because, especially this one with granitsa, it's a fairly common idiom when you're talking about traveling, so it's one to listen for. Okay, that's it for today. Until next time, до свидания, товарищи.